I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public.
What if I told you Tupac Shakur might still be alive, and the man who tried to silence him was none other than Diddy himself? For the first time in 30 years, a bodyguard has stepped forward with evidence the FBI now has in their hands, and if it's real, it could flip the entire world of hip-hop upside down. Hip-hop may have just reached a tipping point, one that could shake its very foundation and force the culture to confront its deepest shadows. For 30 years, the story of Tupac Shakur has existed in a liminal space, part tragedy, part legend, and part puzzle that no one was allowed to solve. Whispers lived in barbershops and message boards. Journalists danced around the rumors with cryptic interviews. Fans traded grainy photographs and breathless claims of late-night sightings like baseball cards. It was a folklore rivaling UFO conspiracies, wild, unbelievable, but impossible to fully dismiss. And now, after decades of hushed speculation, the silence has cracked. The man holding the hammer isn't a blogger, a fan theorist, or a clout-chasing insider. It's someone who lived at the epicenter of the storm. Gene Deal, Diddy's former bodyguard. He isn't stepping forward with vague anecdotes or secondhand gossip. No, he's arriving with what he claims is tangible proof. Evidence that the world's most famous unsolved mystery isn't a mystery at all. Imagine the scene: a sterile federal office, the kind where the air feels heavier than it should. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, buzzing with a faint hum that makes silence feel louder. Gene sits across the table, his old Yankees cap pulled low, sweat glistening at his temples. For decades, he's lived with his lips sealed shut, a man weighed down by secrets he could never share. Every time he looked over his shoulder, every time he caught a shadow that wasn't there, he was reminded of the price of talking. But now, as he slides a battered manila envelope across the table, the balance shifts. The envelope isn't just paper and ink, it's 3 decades of fear, guilt, and the gnawing suspicion that history was rewritten in real time. He cradles it like something fragile, a relic, a forbidden text. His hands tremble not from age, but from the gravity of what he's doing. This is not a man seeking clout. This is someone who once stood within arm's reach of Diddy, privy to the veiled threats, the coded language, and the subtle reminders that silence was the only safe option. He was there for the conversations where one wrong word could be interpreted as a challenge. He watched as favors were called in, as enemies suddenly vanished from the spotlight, and as fear quietly did the heavy lifting of control. For 30 years, Gene says he has carried the burden of knowing too much. He understood that in the power games of hip-hop's golden age, there were 2 kinds of people: those who made the rules and those who enforced them. He was the latter, but he also had eyes, ears, and memory. He saw enough to understand that not everything added up on the night Tupac was supposed to have died. He heard enough to know that silence was worth more than gold, and he felt enough to be haunted by it. But time changes everything. Diddy is no longer the untouchable figure he once was. The mogul who built an empire of music, fashion, and spectacle now finds himself shackled by the law, ensnared in a sweeping RICO case that paints him less like a king and more like a cornered man. Raids, lawsuits, settlements, and a flood of accusers have stripped away his aura of invincibility. The image of the smiling mogul who once toasted both coasts with champagne has been replaced by something far darker. For Gene, that shift is more than symbolic, it's liberating. With Diddy's fortress of influence crumbling, the danger of speaking out feels less like a death sentence and more like a necessary release. For the first time in his adult life, he feels the storm breaking around him rather than over him. For the first time, he can breathe. And with that breath comes the resolve to tell what he claims is the truth. His claim is staggering. Tupac Shakur never died in Las Vegas. The body that fans mourned, the funeral that was whispered about, the cremation that vanished into rumor, all of it, Gene insists, was a cover story. According to him, Tupac slipped out of the world's grasp, aided by forces far larger than anyone imagined. He isn't just hiding from the relentless attention of fans or the reach of enemies. He is hiding from Diddy himself. To understand the gravity of such a claim, you have to rewind to the era when it all began. The mid-1990s were not just years of chart-topping hits and iconic music videos. They were years of paranoia, power plays, and blood on the asphalt. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry wasn't just about diss tracks, it was about money, territory, and survival. At the center of it all stood figures like Suge Knight, Diddy, and Tupac. Every move was amplified. Every feud felt like it could ignite an entire coast. And behind it all were layers of alliances that often blurred the line between music and organized crime. Tupac, larger than life even then, wasn't just an artist. He was a symbol of rebellion, of truth-telling, of a voice too loud to be contained. That made him a legend, but it also made him a target. He spoke openly about death, predicting his own demise in interviews and lyrics. Yet at the same time, he wove riddles into his work, cryptic references to rebirth, to transformation, to faking death as a way to achieve immortality. Fans dissected it as poetry. Gene suggests it was foreshadowing. The night of the Vegas shooting, official reports told a story that never sat right with many who were paying attention. 14 shots fired. Suge Knight grazed but not gravely injured. Tupac hit multiple times. And yet no credible eyewitness could name the shooter. No clear narrative emerged. Even the coroner's report raised eyebrows, listing Tupac's body as taller and heavier than he had ever been in life. The cremator responsible retired the very next day and vanished. Loose threads, strange details, and silences stacked up until they formed something larger than coincidence. Now Gene Deal claims he can fill in those blanks. He speaks of documents, photographs, and tapes proof. He says that Tupac not only survived, but was moved, hidden, and protected. He doesn't describe an accident or a twist of fate. He describes an operation, and behind that operation, he hints, were powers far greater than any record label beef. If true, his revelations wouldn't just rewrite hip-hop history, they would expose the undercurrents that shaped it. Because if Tupac lived, someone made it happen. Someone with reach into hospitals, passports, flight paths, and safe houses. Someone with enough clout to silence witnesses and muddy reports. Someone who could bend the machinery of both law enforcement and the music industry. And in Gene's telling, the shadow looming largest is Diddy himself. It's a claim almost too explosive to believe. And yet it fits the strange puzzle pieces that have never fit anywhere else. Why did eyewitnesses swear they saw Tupac in Havana markets years later? Why did new music appear long after his supposed death, with lyrics that sounded eerily like someone narrating from exile? Why did industry veterans, even Suge Knight himself, hint that the official story was incomplete? Gene's testimony doesn't just reopen those questions, it places them under the harsh light of a courtroom. In the middle of a RICO case where Diddy's empire is already being dissected piece by piece. It raises the stakes from rumor to potential evidence, from fan theory to federal investigation, and perhaps the most unsettling part is not whether Tupac is alive, but what that survival means. If he is hiding, what is he hiding from? If he is alive, who has protected him and for what purpose? And if he chooses to step forward, what truth will collapse with him? For 30 years, Tupac has existed as both martyr and myth, a ghost haunting the culture he helped build. Gene Deal's envelope promises to shift him back into something else entirely. Not a ghost, not a myth, but a man whose survival carries consequences too vast to measure. If that envelope holds what Gene claims it does, hip-hop's longest-running mystery isn't just about to be solved, it's about to explode.
As, is he going to turn people in? Is he going to cooperate? If the federal government wants him to cooperate, and they're going to cut his time, because right now he's looking at 15 to life. With all the charges he had to, he won't get out till 70 years old. He's about 70. That's when they start talking about letting him come to a...
The question on everyone's lips is simple. Why now? From late-night group chats to heated barbershop debates, the curiosity is relentless. Why would Gene Deal break decades of silence and risk everything? Those close to him point to two things: guilt and fear. For years, Gene carried the weight of believing his silence had helped Diddy bury the truth. Not just about that night on the Vegas Strip, but about the story spun afterward. When the world was told Tupac was gone forever, he couldn't shake the memory snippets of conversations, shadowy warnings, and the moments he was paid to look the other way. Diddy's ability to keep his image spotless while others handled the dirt was legendary. But legends don't last forever. When investigators finally came knocking, digging into parties, tapes, and secrets long buried, the armor started to crack. Suddenly, Diddy didn't look untouchable anymore. Suddenly, whispers resurfaced. And suddenly, Gene's phone started ringing at midnight, some voices friendly, others not. Now about this so-called evidence, Gene isn't just spinning rumors for shock value. He insists he's holding physical proof. The trail began with a slip to an old friend, a hint about documents left behind by Shocker himself. Soon, whispers grew louder. There were reports of grainy photos, a familiar jawline, A man puffing a cigar or blending into the streets of Havana. Maybe doctored, maybe not. But then came the alleged bombshell tape. Some say it's audio, the rasp of Shocker's unmistakable voice speaking about freedom, about escaping the life. Others claim the cache is bigger. Travel records, hidden letters, even a bank statement connected to a Cuban account where Tupac's aunt, Asada, Shocker, has lived in exile for decades. So, could this all belong to a secret vault of evidence Tupac prepared as insurance? And if so, did Gene stumble across it back in the 90s only to bury it himself? Terrified as Diddy's empire swelled and seemed immune to consequence.
He was scared. Yes, I agree. I do agree that he was probably terrified for his life. So if that is the case, it's also quite feasible that he put up money to get Pac.
The real question now is, how far down does this rabbit hole go? Because the deeper you look, the messier it gets, like tangled Christmas lights no one can straighten out. The official story has been poked so full of holes it barely holds together. Think back to the original investigation. 14 shots fired, Suge Knight nicked by a fragment. Yet somehow no reliable witness could identify the shooter. Even stranger, Tupac, famous for wearing a bulletproof vest everywhere, was said to have gone without one that single night. The coroner's report, it listed him 2 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier than his known measurements. The man who handled his cremation retired the very next day and disappeared without explanation. And then there was Tupac's own mother, who once suggested her son simply chose to leave quietly. For years, no one dared string those details together out loud. But now, with Diddy's empire dragged into the mud by a sweeping RICO case, the whispers about backroom deals and secret FBI arrangements aren't whispers anymore. They're starting to sound like echoes of a truth long buried.
He has to take responsibility for what he did as an individual. Sean is the one who pulled that gun out. Sean is the one who shot. So he has to take responsibility for...
What if Gene's evidence isn't just about Tupac making it to Cuba, but about how he pulled it off? That's where the story starts to cut even deeper. Multiple former death row insiders off the record have hinted at the same thing. Nobody disappears that cleanly without help from the government. And the real question becomes, who had the kind of connections to make that possible? The whispers sketch out a story like this. Diddy, panicked over his rivals gaining too much ground, sends signals out. The streets are tense. Paranoia is everywhere. And suddenly federal agents appear at death row's doorstep. Officially, they're digging for dirt. Unofficially, some say they were also dangling lifelines. According to the rumors, Diddy struck a deal protection for himself, but only if he played ball with federal interests. Did that mean serving up Shocker? Or did it mean turning away while the FBI, the Black Panthers, and a handful of consultants engineered Tupac's escape? The claims don't stop there. Michael Nice, another ex-bodyguard, once boasted that he personally smuggled Tupac out, swapping bodies, flying a private jet first to Barbados, then on to Cuba. Not long after teasing his evidence, Michael vanished from the scene. Accident? Or another loose end clipped before it unraveled too far? Industry veterans murmur about a secret Havana vault, letters, photographs, recordings. Not just proof of Tupac's survival, but a full paper trail of payoffs and silence that kept the truth buried. Maybe Gene only holds fragments, a Polaroid, a taped voice, a stray receipt slipped out by someone with the right pocket to grease. Or maybe he has the whole collection and has been quietly weighing for years who he could trust to deliver it to. Either way, the FBI now has it in their possession, and if even a shred of it ties Diddy to orchestrating or enabling Shocker's disappearance, then his current legal storm will look like child's play by comparison. The hip-hop world is holding its breath. Veteran label bosses, old A&Rs, and behind-the-scenes fixers, who once believed Bad Boy was untouchable, are suddenly paying very close attention. If Gene's evidence blows the lid off, it won't just be Diddy who sinks. It'll drag down the entire web of favors, cover-ups, and money trails that built the so-called golden age of hip-hop. The real power brokers never wanted the spotlight, and if those tapes or letters are real, a lot of them won't sleep easy. Because it only takes one authenticated recording, one verifiable document, one stray confession caught on wire to topple the facade. And the timing couldn't be worse for Diddy. Once the king of both coasts, the man who turned excess into an art form, he now finds himself stripped bare. Raids, lawsuits, settlements, a parade of accusers and ex-associates jumping ship. The whispers that used to sound like jealous rival talk or internet conspiracy have transformed into headlines. Keefe D flips on Diddy. FBI reopens questions about the '96 Vegas shooting, and Gene Deal delivers new evidence straight into federal hands. The wall of silence isn't just cracking anymore, it's beginning to burst. Gene's sudden decision to speak has set off a ripple effect. Former security men, ex-death row operatives, and relatives of lost artists are all leaning in, watching to see what unspools next. This story has always been about more than a single disappearance. It's about an era when music felt like a battlefield, when a handful of powerful figures could, it's said, make a rival vanish and the rest of the world would pretend not to notice. As more fragments leak, the once-easy dismissal of the conspiracies is getting harder. Cryptic photos from bees, shaky club footage from Havana, and police still chasing leads decades later. These are not the things of tidy myth. Then there's the Machiavellian layer Tupac himself cultivated, lyrics that read like instructions, album moves that some fans interpret as coded breadcrumbs. Supporters have never fully swallowed the official version. How could they, with new tracks surfacing years after Vegas, and eyewitnesses in Cuba swearing they saw him strolling local markets? That's the pressure point right now. Diddy's reputation is fraying. The FBI claims new material. Gene Deal is finally speaking out. And the longest-running mysteries in hip-hop risk moving from late-night rumor to legal record. If a Havana vault exists and contains even a slice of what's been whispered about, it could reframe the golden age as something darker, not just music and innovation, but a network of power, silence, and very deliberate erasures. There's a line in the record industry that goes, "I'm sure everything I am now is death row." Folks who remember those days say the attention will come back around before it's over. The ghosts of that era have a way of reappearing when new light gets shown on old crimes. Whether that light clears everything up or only makes the shadows move is anyone's guess. If the stakes weren't already high, Gene's move cracks open doors into the dustiest vaults of American counterculture. This isn't merely about careers being derailed, it's about rewriting the story of a generation. If Tupac truly slipped away, he didn't do it solo. Multiple insiders and long-running whispers point fingers at organized help, and at one institution in particular, the Black Panthers, whose members the US government once hunted with an intensity reserved for its worst enemies. Those family ties matter. Tupac's mother, Afeni Shocker, was a Panther. His aunt Asada Shocker has lived in Cuban exile for decades and remains a figure of federal interest. So you have to ask, how deep did that loyalty run? According to a former road manager who moved in those circles, the Panthers never really shut down their networks. Safe houses, codes of silence, old logistical tricks. They kept them alive. Some of these insiders insist the escape wasn't luck but a military-style extraction, bribes at hospitals, cleared flight routes, forged passports, and veterans stepping quietly out of retirement to shepherd one of their own to safety. Then there are the whispers about Michael Nice. He boasted to the press that he'd been part of a flight plan, swapping both, hopping a private jet to Barbados, then on to Cuba, and that he and a few trusted Panthers had pulled it off. He hinted at proof, then promptly went off the radar. Coincidence or another severed thread? That pattern. A man teases evidence, then disappears from public view, shows up too many times to ignore. Finally, ask yourself what the Panthers would leave behind, if anything. Did they wipe the trail so clean that only the most stubborn bodyguard 3 decades later could begin to piece the story back together? Or did they leave breadcrumbs, letters, photos, tapes, hidden in plain sight in Havana? Either scenario has the same consequence. If even a fraction of these claims checks out, the narrative of hip-hop's golden age will look very different, shaped not just by art and ambition, but by alliances, cover-ups, and the desperate lengths people went to protect one another. This is where the conspiracy leaves theory and hits the street. The sightings. They've surfaced in waves over the years, each one adding fuel to the fire. A man with Tupac swagger and signature bandana photographed in a Cuban bar, laughing with locals. Elderly Havana residents swearing on camera that El Rapero Americano roams their markets, always glancing over his shoulder. A grainy cell phone clip shows a figure slipping into a back alley as teenagers chase after him. Investigators like Jimmy Poole even claim they've secured photos of a middle-aged Shocker, arm in arm with a fan in bees. One DJ in Santiago swears Tupac once jumped on stage, rapped in Spanish for a stunned crowd, and disappeared before anyone could process what they'd seen. the Asada Shocker connection makes it all more plausible. Locals know her as the American woman living quietly under Cuban government protection. If Cuba could shelter her for decades, why not extend that same shield to her nephew? As one government source put it, if you wanted to disappear, there's no better place than under revolutionary Cuba's umbrella. And history backs it up. Plenty of exiles have arrived there with fake passports, new names, and strict instructions: no contact, no confessions, no breaking cover. Tupac himself seemed to foreshadow the possibility. He spoke often about expecting a short life, about knowing he'd likely get gunned down. But his art told another story: hidden codes, rearranged titles, cryptic lyrics. Exit Shocker. Enter Mac. Fans still comb his posthumous albums for winks and farewells. Some argue he staged sightings himself, feeding the myth, making sure his story never died even as the industry tried to bury it. If that's true, what was the endgame? To make a triumphant return when the coast cleared door to watch the empire crumble from a safe distance, maybe even during Diddy's RICO trial. That's where the stakes expand. Because this doesn't just look like a conspiracy anymore, it feels like a chess match on a global board. If Diddy goes down, whether for the lurid parties or for something darker, the dominoes won't stop with him. The FBI has already pried open a chapter of history many believed untouchable. And if Gene Deal's evidence ties Diddy to not only industry politics, but government collusion, Panther networks, and Tupac's survival, we're staring at a scandal that reaches from record label bosses to retired federal agents. And hovering over it all is the biggest question: if Tupac really is alive in Cuba, why has he stayed silent? Fear of retaliation, a careful plan, waiting for the right moment. Could he have been pulling strings from the shadows all along, feeding leaks, nudging witnesses, guiding Gene to finally speak? Rumors now suggest he may even step forward through testimony, or a statement as Diddy's empire buckles. Is it desperate wishful thinking, or the inevitable end of a decades-long silence? Then there's the human cost. Kesha Morris, Shocker, his former wife, has broken her silence in interviews, adding another layer of humanity to the myth. Families of the fallen still ache for closure. Millions of fans have kept vigil for decades, holding candles for a man they never truly believed was gone. Friends who took risks to protect him may now watch their sacrifices rewritten in the headlines. If the truth surfaces, if Tupac Shakur is proven alive, fallout could rival any social eruption since the law riots. And for the industry, this is more than history, it's survival. Veteran insiders admit, off-camera, that if confirmation comes from the FBI or Cuban authorities, everything is at stake: back catalogs, royalty structures, and the very story hip-hop has told about itself for nearly 30 years. None of it would emerge unchanged. As for Diddy, even if he manages to beat the smaller charges in court, his troubles are far from over. The shadows around his image are thick now, with accusers, informants, and former allies lining up for immunity. The music industry is holding its breath, bracing for the possibility that decades of carefully buried secrets may finally be dragged into the light. For the rest of us, it's a scramble to keep pace, sifting through leaks from supposed vaults, dodging deliberate disinformation, and waiting for the next revelation. Another bodyguard, another Panther, another witness who can no longer carry the silence. Each new voice reshapes the narrative, pulling the curtain back a little further. So here's the million-dollar question: if Tupac Shakur really is alive, what happens when that truth shatters the surface? Who shoulders the blame for keeping him hidden all these years? Does Diddy go down alone, or does the entire house of cards collapse with him, taking an era of power players with it? Theories will multiply, evidence will be debated, and predictions will fly. But one thing is certain: when the next chapter detonates, nobody will want to say they looked away. Until then, stay sharp, stay questioning, and remember, in stories like these, the truth often hides in plain sight.